Everyone pictures the Emperor of China as the freest man alive. A word from him raised armies and emptied treasuries. And yet this same man could not walk out of his own front gate when he pleased, could not choose the woman he woke beside, could not decide how he spent a single hour of his morning, and had begun building his own tomb before he was 30. The most powerful man in the world was, in truth, the most expensive prisoner the world has ever kept. And the empire spent a fortune making sure he could never forget it. And here is the part almost no one knows. The very cost of keeping him, the gold, the ceremonies, the endless relatives, did not make his empire stronger. In the end, it helped bring the whole thing down. The emperor wasn't the owner of the empire. He was its most costly and most carefully maintained instrument, a living symbol that a vast machine was built to feed, dress, guard, marry, and eventually bury on a schedule he didn't set. The empire didn't belong to him, he belonged to it. This runs against everything we picture when we imagine a throne. We see gold, silk, armies waiting for a command, and a man who can take anything he wants. But the truth sits closer to a high priest bound to a temple or a chief executive who can't resign. The emperor's title was Son of Heaven, and that title came with a contract. His job was to keep cosmic harmony between heaven, earth, and human society. If he failed, earthquakes, floods, and rebellions were read as heaven withdrawing its mandate. So his meals, his clothes, his marriages, and even his burial weren't private choices. They were public investments in the stability of the realm, and the state treated them that way. In many European courts, a monarch could plausibly claim that the realm was his private property. In imperial China, the ideology pointed the other way. The emperor was a steward, not an owner. He stood at the top of the fiscal system, but he didn't personally manage its daily workings. He could issue edicts and punish officials, yet the actual flow of revenue depended on a vast bureaucracy whose corruption and competence shaped what he really had to spend. He presided over an enormous enterprise whose internal inefficiencies both funded his grandeur and limited his freedom. That's the frame you need before a single number makes sense. To understand him, you have to stop thinking of the emperor as a person and start counting him as a budget. And that budget had several very different departments. The first department was the body itself. His food, his medicine, and his clothing were kept to imperial standard, but this was never about personal taste. A single meal might involve a mountain of dishes prepared by hundreds of cooks, yet the emperor often ate alone, and his diet was shaped by health and ritual rules rather than appetite. We covered the kitchen in another video, so I'll leave it at this. The food was one wing of a much larger machine, and we're here to see the rest. The second department was the household. Thousands of eunuchs and palace women served a single family. Their salaries, housing, clothing, and rations formed a permanent line item that never went away. The workforce was larger than most towns, and every person in it was there for life. The third department was ritual. A fixed calendar of state sacrifices dictated where the emperor stood, what he wore, and when he fasted. These weren't private devotions. They were the constitutional performances that made his rule legitimate, and each one demanded expensive logistics, sacrificial animals, processions, and hundreds of attendants. The fourth department was succession. The consort system, often called the harem, existed to produce and legitimize an heir. It was administered like any other office, with ranks, records, and budgets. Its purpose was dynastic continuity, not personal pleasure, and the state treated it that way. The fifth department was the afterlife. An emperor was expected to begin his own mausoleum during his reign, and the cost of building and later staffing it was carried for decades. This was money committed to his own death while he was still alive, an obligation of the office rather than a taste he chose. Each of these 5 departments had its own bureaucracy, its own rules, and its own fixed costs, and the emperor couldn't cancel any of them. The first cost was the one you would least expect. It wasn't gold, it wasn't palaces, it was family. In the Ming Dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644, the law stated that every descendant of the founding emperor was owed a hereditary rank and a lifetime stipend from the state. The founder began with a small family. Over roughly 2.5 centuries, that clan multiplied into the tens of thousands and passed 100,000 by the late Ming, all drawing payments the emperor couldn't legally cut because they were his own blood. By the late Ming, in some provinces, the grain owed to the imperial family consumed roughly half the tax income collected from the entire province. The richest man alive couldn't stop paying his own cousins, and feeding his family was quietly bankrupting his provinces. The expensive part was never the gold or the palace walls. It was the standing human infrastructure. Thousands of people served a single household for life. Count the hands, not the treasure. The Forbidden City functioned as a small city whose entire economic purpose was to maintain one family, and most of its cost walked on 2 legs. Eunuchs alone numbered in the thousands under the Qing, and that was after the court had deliberately reduced their ranks. Each one received salaries, rice rations, and housing within the palace compound. High-ranking eunuchs kept private kitchens and servants of their own, all funded by the same system. If you want to see the rest of what it truly cost to keep one man on the dragon throne, then do stay with me and subscribe. This is where we sit with how power in Asia really worked, slowly, the way it deserves. Put all of it together and you arrive at the strange truth sitting at the very center of the throne. The second cost bought nothing you could ever touch, and the emperor wasn't allowed to skip a single day of it. The ritual calendar owned his time. State sacrifices at the winter solstice, rites to the ancestors, to soil and grain, to sun and moon. These weren't private devotions he chose. They were the constitutional performances that made his rule legitimate, and each one demanded processions, fasting, regulated robes, sacrificial animals, and hundreds of attendants. His days and a real slice of the state budget were prescribed by a liturgy written centuries before he was born. He didn't decide how he spent those hours. The calendar did. He couldn't choose the woman he woke beside. Marriages and consorts were institutional decisions shaped by politics, rank, and the need for an heir. The apparatus of consorts and record-keeping existed to produce and legitimize a successor, and the state ran it with ranks, records, and budgets like any other department. The state managed his reproductive life because the state needed his dynasty to continue, and he couldn't simply leave. When the emperor traveled, the entire capital traveled with him. Even the Empress Dowager, when she traveled, moved the palace with her. By some accounts, her train devoted whole carriages just to her kitchen, with scores of cooks and dozens of stoves, so that she could eat on the road exactly as she did at home. Movement outside the palace was itself an operation requiring the machine to relocate. The most powerful man in the world couldn't take a walk. Let me ask you something. If you owned the whole world and yet could not choose your own morning, would you call that power or the finest cage ever built? Tell me below. I read every answer. So now let's look at the machine itself, piece by piece, and see how each part locked together. The calendar, the clothes, the household, the succession, the tomb. Each was a fixed cost imposed by law, ritual, and custom, and the one man who could supposedly do anything was powerless to cancel any of them. The wardrobe was law, not vanity. Dragon robes and their colors and emblems were regulated by rank code, and the Imperial Household Department managed inventories, repairs, and replacements to make sure the emperor always had the correct attire. A mistake in dress could be read as disrespect to heaven, so his clothing choices were micromanaged by palace regulations. He couldn't simply dress as he pleased. He had to wear the right robe for the right ceremony, and each piece required high-quality silk, embroidery, and sometimes gold thread or pearls. The production of imperial garments supported entire workshops and regional textile economies, but the consumption wasn't discretionary. It was structurally mandated by the expectations placed on the emperor's appearance. And beneath the surface of the clothes sat an even more personal system of control. The succession apparatus was a state institution. In the Qing dynasty, which followed the Ming, succession was handled through a secret designation system. The reigning emperor wrote the heir's name in a sealed edict hidden until his death to reduce open conflict among princes. The accession ceremony then required mourning rites, full prostration before the Empress Dowager, a formal audience in the Hall of Supreme Harmony, and the public reading of the accession edict. These weren't family matters. They were state rituals that turned a private decision into a public and cosmologically valid transfer of authority. The cost was political and administrative, and it ran continuously. And the strangest cost of all was waiting at the end of the road. The emperor began paying for his own tomb the moment he sat down on the throne, because it was for the day he would die. Emperors began their mausoleums during their reigns, and these were among the costliest construction projects a dynasty ever undertook. The Qianlong Emperor's tomb in the eastern Qing tombs took about 9 years to build and cost roughly 1.75 million taels of silver. Another late Qing mausoleum cost over 2 million taels, and by traditional accounts, the treasures buried inside were valued at tens of millions of taels, a staggering sum for a dynasty already in decline. Even when tombs were financed from the imperial household's private trading income rather than the state budget, the scale was staggering. The emperor was funding his own funeral from the day he took the throne. It looked like a home. It was never a home. It was the head office of a dynasty, and the emperor was the one employee who could never resign. It looked like the greatest wealth on earth. It was never really wealth. It was a bill written in gold that arrived every single day. And the one man who could command anything was the one man who was never allowed to stop paying it. For a rising dynasty, all of this looked like glory. For a dying one, it looked like something closer to a disease, the same machine, the opposite meaning. At a dynasty's height, the cost of the emperor read as majesty, the visible proof that the realm was rich enough to maintain a living symbol of cosmic order. The gold, the processions, the thousands of attendants, and the vast tombs were evidence that heaven's chosen steward was properly cared for. The expense was read as strength. In decline, the exact same fixed household costs read as rot. A court still demanding to be fed and dressed and buried in gold while the treasury emptied and the borders frayed. The wardrobe didn't shrink. The ritual calendar didn't pause. The imperial clan still collected its hereditary stipends. The tomb still had to be built. The costs were locked in by law and tradition, and the empire couldn't cut them even when it could no longer afford them. Same machine, opposite meaning. And there was one dynasty where you can watch the machine slowly grow heavier than the empire that was carrying it. In the late Ming, the same clan stipends that were swallowing whole provinces had grown heavier than the treasury could bear. The machine built to glorify the throne grew heavier than the realm could carry, and the weight helped bring the whole house down. The state tried to compensate with catastrophic new levies, adding surcharges for military campaigns and bandit suppression that crushed peasants already reeling from climate disasters and land concentration. By the final years of the Ming, the treasury was all but empty. The fixed cost of simply being the imperial house had become a structural weight the tax system couldn't lift. A late Ming emperor's suicide in 1644 marked the end of a dynasty that had, in effect, bled itself dry, maintaining its own throne. And if a powerful person today cannot control their own calendar or cannot cut a cost that everyone can plainly see is bleeding the house dry because tradition and the people around them simply will not allow it, then they have felt, in a small way, the very same walls the emperor felt. It is a very old arrangement. He could command anything and choose almost nothing. That is the quiet arithmetic of absolute power. The empire never truly belonged to the emperor. The emperor belonged to the empire, and it kept him the way a temple keeps its most precious, most guarded, and most costly treasure, cared for beyond all measure, and never for a single day free. If this was worth your time, then subscribe and stay a while. There are more of these hidden rules of power still to come, and the next one is already being prepared. And if you want a peek inside the Forbidden City's secret luxuries, watch this video next.